Welcome to PCI's Code It videocast. I'm Kristin Johansson, Editor-in-Chief of PCI Magazine. Over the years, I have met with various people who play a role in projecting regional and global color popularity for both automotive and architectural coatings, and I've always found this process really interesting. These teams pull color trends and ideas from everywhere, including fashion runways, electronics, interior design, the political scene, and more. When I received news that the color marketing group had released its key colors for 2022, I wondered how the pandemic affected their usual color forecasting process. So I reached out to Montaha Hidefi, Vice President Color Forecasting at CMG, to ask her, and she joins me today for this videocast. Hi Montaha, thanks so much for being here today.
Hi Kristin, thanks for having me, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, well, let's get started. Montaha, how has the pandemic impacted color forecasting, both in the process and in the way that you work?
Well, Kristin, tell me if there's anything in the world that wasn't really impacted by the pandemic. When it comes to the process itself, we had to reinvent the wheel, actually. Maybe I should rather say invent a new sort of wheel that had the capacity to work online, actually. And so with the pandemic spreading around the world last year, the color marketing group board of directors made a decision to avoid interrupting the color forecasting. And so we went virtual on Zoom. As you know, forecasting is best done in person. But the main reason for that, when we do it in person, is to safeguard the accuracy of the colors selected. So, which even though we usually rely on science-based color systems to basically get the accuracy, we always have to confirm those selections visually as well, because, you know, the visual it exceeds anything else. And so because of that, first it was really very difficult for us to figure out a way to do this, but we ended up managing that area. But the difficulty of forecasting virtually wasn't only related to color accuracy, but it was related mostly to the emotional and mental state of the forecasters. That was the hardest part. And normally, we get inspirations like from trade shows, fashion shows, new product releases, new technologies, you name it. But being unable to get that information because of the lockdown was very hard on all the forecasters, of course, including myself. It was also super difficult for us to disconnect from what was going on at that time. But, you know, we had to keep going and pushing forward, which we did. At the end of the forecasting season, when it was time to decide what colors to select, when we looked at the colors that were submitted, and there were over 1,000, believe it or not, more than a third was practically neutral, achromatic, nearly colorless. And that was a huge revelation. But at the same time, we also noticed that there were colors overly chromatic, like really very bright. So some of the colors were muted, the others were super vibrant. So we ended up basically having to balance the forecast with part of this and part of that. So that was a very unusual year for forecasting. Now, from a workflow perspective, the virtual process made us really more focused on the task. And so, you know, you jump on Zoom, you have an hour or two to do something, and everybody is focused on doing that. So there are no chit-chattings, no small talk, no side discussions, and only one person is talking at a time. So that was really, I would say that was very productive, and we managed to fulfill all the agenda in the required time that we had. And so as the year continued, we continue with the virtual forecasting, of course, but then we have polished the process. And this year we have a much more polished process. And of course, we're missing the in-person forecasting, but that's our world now and we have to adapt.
Yes, I think we all miss that person-to-person connection and networking. Okay, my next question is, do certain colors become more popular than others during a pandemic?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Kristen, which I have got a lot lately. And so obviously the color direction usually gets affected by many factors, not only something like the pandemic, but any global event can affect the color direction. But I also always like to make a distinction when I get this question. There is a difference between color trends and between color forecasting. And so when you see a color getting popular or you see it predominant now in the market, that is a trend. And when what we do at the color marketing group, we do color forecasting. That means we predict where the color is going to go in 2 years from now. So the colors that we're seeing right now in the market from any side or for any product, those colors have been decided a year ago or 2 years ago. Obviously, they got affected by the pandemic, but not directly, right? And so when it comes to the forecast, though, we did notice something very important last year. We did see the importance of yellow in the forecast. And yellow was brought up as a symbol of the warmth of the sun that we were missing because we were all inside. Also the light, and the hope for better times in the future. But at the same time, we also saw a swing in the direction of yellow. So it wasn't the yellow that you usually see, it was more an orange direction in the yellows. And what does that mean actually? It means that the yellows will be more saturated and have more red influences in them. So they are very warm yellows, almost orange. Some of them are orange actually. But we also saw in the forecast, we saw the surge of the blue family on a very broad range. And so the blue in this case was symbolic of the blue skies and blue waters, because again, we were indoors, we were not seeing the skies except from small windows that we had. And basically we were missing the sun, we were missing the outdoors, we were missing all these things, and that really affected the direction of the colors that were submitted by the people that attended the forecasting sessions. But one interesting thing, and that you will like this, Kristen, is that the blues that we saw coming in, they had this purple tone to them. And we also saw an increase in the purple family. So in general, purple is related to spirituality and religion. But in the forecast, what was very, very interesting, that these colors had nothing to do with spirituality. And purple was related mostly to the importance of technology in our daily lives during the pandemic. So as we saw a surge in technology, we have seen the surge in purple colors related to technology. I don't know if you remember, Kristen, or if you followed this. In the last decade, the color of technology was mainly silver.
Mhm.
So, and then it went into white. And now the color of technology is what? Purple. To me, that's fascinating.
It really is. And it's so interesting to see how the pandemic has affected so many aspects of our lives, not just our restricting our physical activities, but changing the way that we now do things. And then also how it's affected our minds and the human psyche, really.
Indeed.
So, okay, well, I have two more questions that actually aren't necessarily related to the pandemic. The first one is, how and when does color forecasting apply to industrial applications?
That is a great question. I really love the way you have your questions because they're up to the point and they tell a story. They allow me to tell a story, actually. Some people in the industry might say that color forecasting does not really apply to industrial applications. And to a certain extent, I agree with that. However, when it comes to color, basically, if we take, for instance, in consideration these specification applications, obviously certain colors do not change, right? they have to go on for years because they are specified. And I can give you some examples to this, for instance, the lighting industry, or if we take electrical boxes where you see a lot of gray most of the time, or if you look into like safety markings where yellow is abundant for safety reasons. I could also think of like marine and aerospace applications where the most important thing has nothing to do with the color itself, but with the property of the coating, right? So in those cases, I do agree that color forecasting or even color trends do not apply. But I could think of many other applications that are considered industrial, where color plays a big a role and very important role. And for instance, I can give you an example about Disney Imagineering. You know, Disney Imagineering is the branch that is responsible for research and development for Disney World. And they are also responsible for like the themes, introducing new themes, but also maintaining new themes. And some years ago, I met the head designer of Disney Imagineering. And so the goal of my meeting with him was to talk about color forecasting. But he surprised me, and when he told me that to be able to provide the kids that visit Disney World with their parents, of course, to be able to provide them with the same experience that their parents might have had 20 years ago when they went there, when it comes to all these old themes, they have to use the same colors that they used 20 or 30 years ago. So they don't look really at color forecasts or color trends, but they go and look at the consistency of offering the same experience. And that usually comes through maintaining the same colors. And how do they do to maintain the same colors is they basically stick to specific suppliers that can really provide them with color consistency over time. So you see, that's so fascinating to me because they don't care about that, yet they provide probably the most colorful world in the world, right? With all these themes. Also, I mean, I can think of certain industrial applications where manufactured products are used in decorative settings. So in those applications, color forecasting is very, very important to allow the manufacturers to offer products that will meet the consumer demand. I can give you some examples to that. For instance, patio furniture has to be trendy. Planters have to be trendy. Even office furniture nowadays have to be trendy, and office supplies. So those areas, although industrial applications, they need to pay attention to color and what's going on in that area.
Okay, my last question for you is, at what stage of the product development process should we start thinking about the color?
That is really, truly interesting. You know, Kristin, that I worked for many years with industrial applications. And during that time, I always collaborated with R&D through the innovation process and product development. But in all this time, never, ever, ever, I have seen a product being developed without color. It just doesn't work this way, you know, unless you're really working with some kind of raw metal or raw fiber. I find that the color is part of the process from the very initial stages. In product development, you know, designers usually follow what is called CMF, which means color, material, and finish, which are usually characteristics of the product development. So they can't really think about the material and the finish of the product without taking into consideration the color, of course. And so I do believe that color is an intricate part of the product development process. And I should say it's part of the toolkit of the product designer or the product development or in R&D. And obviously, depending on the industry, as we know, product development might take 3 months, might take 3 years. So if people are developing a product that will be put in the market in 3 years from now, they have to know what products, in what color they need to put in the market in 3 years from now. I'll give you an example. If we say, let's say a t-shirt manufacturer or a shirt manufacturer, they are putting in the market a new design, right? And that's for next year. And let's say they decided to do it green. And let's say they have no idea what colors are forecasted for next year, or they don't know nothing about the trends. And so next year they put the green shirts in the market, but then the trend is blue and everybody is buying blue. I can assure you those green shirts will never sell.
It makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, Montaha, thank you so much for sharing all this information with me. It's really very fascinating. I could talk to you for a lot longer. I hope that this year's forecasting process is a little bit easier for your team. I have a feeling that some of it or most of it will still be virtual, but you at least been through it now once before, and you probably have a good system in place now, right?
Indeed, this year we put additional steps in place to make sure that the forecasting process is much easier on the events facilitators and also on the participants. And we are hoping to go back to in-person forecasting sometime next year, hopefully. And Kristin, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope that the audience will benefit from this talk.
Thank you. I'm sure that they will. We will feature an article by Montaha in our April issue that discusses the key colors for 2022, as well as more information on the color forecasting process that the Color Marketing Group developed last year during the height of the pandemic. So be sure to check out that article. Thanks for listening.